Ben 10 Omniverse is nearly a perfect continuation and celebration of all things Ben 10. I've said this a number of times now, but it's worth reiterating. When Omniverse first released, I had a bit of a lukewarm reaction to it. It had a major shift in tone and obviously had such a dramatic shift in art direction. And from the promotional material, I'd convinced myself it was a reboot, and from that, I'd hardly given it the time of day when it first aired. In saying that, however many years later, after giving it another chance, I fell in love with the series. But like with any series, even ones I absolutely adore like Ben 10, they do tend to have their flaws or even just bits and pieces I'd like to have seen handled differently. Even those of you who may not enjoy Omniverse, I think we can all agree that it had some really spectacular moments, and probably a handful of issues sprinkled throughout. So inspired by Totally Not Mark with his rewriting Dragon Ball Super series, I wanted to give Ben 10 Omniverse that same treatment, or at least a similar one. I've certainly analysed the series enough to have a reasonable understanding of events, character arcs, and general themes that follow the ongoing story. So in this video, I'll be tackling from the More Things Change Part 1 up until the ending of Showdown Part 2, so functionally the first 2 seasons. And before we get into this video proper, if you're enjoying what I do here, please subscribe, that'd be greatly appreciated. Otherwise, if you want to share this video around, that would be amazing. But back into it. It's right into the action with a sort of classic era familiar Ben, right against the sort of mysterious villain. The only change I'd make here is a pretty quick one with the dialogue. Malware talks as if it's the first time he's met Ben, taunting him, saying, "Is this all the great Ben Tennyson is capable of?" In our version here, we'd have something more familiar, maybe something along the lines of, "I won't let you stand between me and what I want again." Teasing that there's more of a backstory here to this villain rather than him just being a colour-swapped mechamorph. Then we're absolutely keeping this brief moment between feedback before our next change with the Zombozo chase. I'd cut to Mr. Smoothie with Kevin, Gwen and Ben sitting down for a meal together. Kevin and Gwen building up the nerve to break some news to a totally oblivious Ben, who's in his own little world, smashing down chili fries, expecting the status quo to never change, only to have that tension cut by Zombozo appearing on the scene, with the three of them chasing him down. I see no reason to change the scene from here whatsoever. We get to see these characters we've grown so attached to working together to take down that villain, and after all of this is said and done, we get the news that the pair are leaving to college. It's mostly the same outcome, we get a bittersweet goodbye between them, just this time the news is a bit more jarring to Ben along with us as the audience. Ben gives Zombozo the same solo act speech before we cut to someone watching over Ben from afar. Ben then visits Grandpa Max, sort of same as usual, before he goes on patrol and faces against Zed. And we as the audience get our second look at the person watching over Ben with Kyber. The events of this episode largely play out as normal from here, though I know some people don't enjoy some of the comedic elements like Pac-Man or Mr. Bauman, but in this rewrite I see no harm in keeping them. I want to sort of refine that blend of comedic and darker elements that Omniverse already handles well. From there we get the same fight at Mr. Bauman's and the introduction of Rook, especially with that dynamic between Ben and Rook really focusing in on Ben's headstrong approach to going solo. Now at the end of this episode, rather than teasing Kyber sending Zed down to the Undercity, we get a flashback post-Ultimate Alien of Kyber on his ship, lugging the now lifeless Ultimate Humungosaur onto it, saying something along the lines of how refreshing it was hunting something that was actually a challenge for him. And either by speaking to the Ultimate Vaxosaurian or using some sort of scanning device, he learns about Ben and sees him as well as the Omnitrix as his next big trophy. I'm going for a bit of a Kraven the Hunter and Spider-Man dynamic here. Moving on to the next episode, we get Ben's first time in Undertown, only this time we'll condense the episode down a bit. Same thing with Ben assuming Zed was working for Siphon's group, tracking them down and confronting them, where they're then interrupted by Zed, but this time I really want to focus in on the story beat with Siphon saying,
"He's not mine!"
with an extended sequence of Zed ruining their operations as Siphon watches on in horror, just trying to stay out of her way. We can largely skim over Jolt from the past. There's some fun world building and the introduction of Gravitak, but we'll leave this one largely untouched other than a little scene at the end. After defeating Fistrix's mech suit, we see the smallest piece of black and red Galvanic mechamorph come out of the water and assimilate the suit. Continuing on from the previous episode, we cut to Malware's perspective of his origins, the creation of the Galvanic mechamorphs, and the promises Azimuth made to him, as well as the time he spent waiting and eventually going after Azimuth, only to be interrupted by his first confrontation with Ben. From there, this episode goes as usual, and we get Kyber sneaking around the plumber's headquarters at the very end. Another slice of life episode with Have I Got a Deal for You? No real change here, I quite liked the episode, sort of builds on the world more, no notes here. Similar with It Was Them, only let's make note of Kyber and Zed's involvement here. Kyber feeling like he's built up more of a confidence after learning what he did from the plumber's headquarters, only to be bested again, this time incidentally from Animo. And we'll really focus in on Ben's analysis of Zed.
It's like a Ben-eating monster.
And we get what is possibly one of the biggest episodes in Omniverse, so long and thanks for the smoothies. Only change I'd make here, and this may be silly, is maybe changing up who's involved. I don't know if the Riedel brothers really feel all that formidable here. After the Annihilag is discovered, I'd bring on some heavier hitters. You could quite reasonably have Vilgax, Eon, or anyone who'd really be interested in a device like the Annihilag being after it. Same end result though here with the bomb going off, the universe being erased and Ben as Alien X restoring it. And if we're introducing some of those bigger bads here, we'd have Ben as Alien X when restoring the universe, sending them back to their homeworlds. You could even have some dialogue about Rook and Argent not believing those villains were there in the first place, along with Ben recreating the universe. And then there's a tease of some future events. I'd have an end scene with a glimpse of Starbeard. The episode Hot Stretch would stay largely unchanged. It's another slice of life episode that won't really affect this story arc majorly. For those of you who aren't major fans of Esther, or even how Omniverse handles Ben's romance, feel free to let me know. I think that itself could be a rewriting video. And now we're really getting somewhere with the episode Predators and Prey Part 1. We get right back into the flashback with Malware before Zed ambushes Ben again. We'd keep that little bit of downtime between Rook, Grandpa Max, and Ben, the two of them then staging a fight between one another, which brings me to something I hadn't really discussed enough with their dynamic. We're 9 episodes into the series, and the way these two characters have bonded is really great and all, but I feel like it came a bit too easily. I'd say we're at this point in the series where their relationship should have felt like it's just sort of started to cement itself, and this big sort of false blowout feels like they're airing out any tension they may have had before well and truly becoming great partners. We cut back 5 years with Malware and Dr. Psychobos working on the Nemetrix together, then transitioning to Kyber, linking the three together. Same events from here, though I'd have Ben cycle through a few more familiar faces before Kyber captures him. Next episode, we cut to Ben upside down in Kyber's ship with Kyber taunting him. This is where Kyber shows off his array of trophies made up of all sorts of Ben's alien species. He then gives us the same sort of summary of events, only this time mentioning the ultimate Vaxasaurian who initially led him to discovering Ben. Then obviously the Nemetrix subplot, only this time it'd have a piece of dialogue with Kyber saying his goals align nicely with those of Malware and Psychobos. It being more of a mutual arrangement this time rather than the two of them just hiring him. We get the same sequence of Kyber hunting down all those predator species. And of course the flashback with Phil and the test run of the Nemetrix. Only this time I'd have Phil's corruption happen a little bit quicker, with his hybrid monster form sort of taking shape over the course of that fight. Just a quick note, I love how Kyber handles Wrath here, knowing that group that sort of takes him down pretty effortlessly. Everything in this sequence can stay pretty much untouched. Only this time I'd have Ben using Humongousaur's ability to grow when fighting against his predator, though that is his undoing, only becoming a bigger target for their webbing ability. Ben and Rook then defeat Kyber before we get that great end sequence with Kyber and Zed licking their wounds before Psychobos and Malware appear. We cut to the beginning of Outbreak with these villains trying to fix the Nemetrix before Psychobos steals a piece of the Omnitrix. I'd forgotten just how plot relevant the episode Outbreak was. I'd always remembered it as a sort of fun throwaway transformation episode. I will say I wouldn't end the episode with Kick and Hawk though. Back to the villains though, they've fixed the Nemetrix and they have their little maniacal laugh. One change I'd make, and I'm sure you've noticed, in the last few episodes Malware has gone through a bit of a visual change with no explanation. We're later to find out through flashbacks that this happened after absorbing the tachyon cannon, but in this version of events, I'd have the visual change happen here after they acquire a piece of the Omnitrix, as a way to sort of build up the villain a bit, rather than having the visual reveal now and the explanation 4 or so episodes later. A fun episode but no major consequences with many happy returns. No notes here, fun sort of side episode, but I have things play out the same. Same goes for the next 2 episodes with Gorn Fishing and Bluekick and Droober go to Mr. Smoothie, before we get back into the action with Malfactor. We get Kyber ambushing Ben again. I've always adored this little action sequence between Armadillo and Zed. We get another flashback with Malware, happening largely the same, only this time without the visual change. And we come back to the present with Ben and Malware getting reacquainted, now with Malware's bigger, badder form. In this rewrite, I'd like to really lean into how shaken up Ben is by his reappearance. Taking this very seriously, I'd want to hit a tone somewhere between Ben's fear of Zombozo and Classic, with the anger he felt against Agrigor. This isn't the happy-go-lucky attitude we're used to with him. He's shaken, but he's fighting through it. We get a few more fun, unrelated episodes, especially Ben again with the introduction of Professor Paradox, Eon, and Ben 10K. Then you've got Ben 23 and everything that happens in Special Delivery. I'd like to have some sort of main story elements weaved in here, but these are some fun episodes to jump in and out of. Getting into it with our 2-part finale with Showdown Part 1 and 2. The 3 villains arrive on Galvin B. Just a thought that I'm not overly committed to, but I'd have some of the villains use Animo's technology in order to revive the Galvin Predator, rather than just getting a sample from its skeleton. Some really great sequences here, along with a really nice feedback flashback. Ben and Rook then get teleported to Galvin B, same as normal. I'm not sure what I'd change here. I think teleporting in felt off in some way, though I do like Ben being thrown into a situation here and having to adapt. From here, I'd have events play out the same with Psychobos and Kyber clashing heads, and Azimuth eventually winning over Zed. Feels a bit out of character for Psychobos to have a cerebral crustacean predator in the Nemetrix in the first place, but we'll leave it. And we get the major flashback of this arc, with Ben being confronted by his dependency on feedback. him lashing out at the others, particularly Gwen, before Malware literally tears the form out of the Omnitrix. Now this scene is just about perfect. As odd as it is having feedback be a physical manifestation outside of Ben, Malware's involvement makes it feel tangible and reasonable. Ben in tears strikes Malware with the device, teasing his corruption being cured before overloading the Mechamorph, defeating him at least for the time being. Back to the present day, Azimuth lays out that the Omnitrix wouldn't allow any more feedback species in the Omnitrix from that point. Only in this version, I want to really note that this isn't the original Omnitrix that wouldn't have allowed that. This is the fully formed non-prototype version of the Omnitrix. So I'd even have Azimuth make a note that we don't know why this version of the Omnitrix won't allow feedback. And we get the end of part 1 with Galvan's moon being destroyed. This time I'd probably show Malware doing it rather than that being revealed in part 2. We see fragments of Malware landing on the planet, destroying the technology it comes into contact with. Now functionally a kaiju, he confronts Azimuth and Ben. There's this nice little bit of dialogue here with Azimuth trying to reason with Malware before attacking him. I probably would have let this moment breathe for a moment, giving Malware a moment to consider this before the interruption of being attacked. We get right back into the action with this new Malware overpowering Humongousaur, before Ben's rescued by Rook, Gwen and Kevin. Right back into things of the return of Waybig, coming down, crashing into Malware, before the next major action sequence between the two of them. Kevin and Zed meet up. This time, upon seeing Zed, I'd have Kevin smirk, teasing a sort of love for animals. Back to Waybig and Malware, we see the sequence play out as usual. Malware totally overtaking this transformation before we get the meeting of our Ben and his former self. Seeing his younger self after what happened with feedback, the way he said goodbye to Grandpa Max and Gwen, and the conversation between himself and Azimuth, resulting in Ben and his younger self having that really great conversation, with him forgiving himself and his younger self. From there we see Ben as feedback exiting Malware, only this time I have the reveal do some more serious damage to Malware's body. And from here I can't see a single change I'd make. We get the phenomenal sequence between feedback and Malware, eventuating Malware's defeat, ending the two-parter with Kevin taking Zed on as his own before the Mechamorphs reform Galvan's moon, tying things up quite nicely. Now to end this rewriting Ben 10 Omniverse video, this series doesn't really need a rewrite. It functions so well on its own, I'm just approaching the series with my own personal preference and nearly 13 years of hindsight, making very few changes. If you have any thoughts or feelings on the changes I made, let me know. Otherwise, if there's any elements you change, I'd love to hear them. If you'd like this to become a series, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.